Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Recording 8, Chapter 16, The Heavenly Gathering. Let us proceed with our discussion and advance towards the next section of the dua. O my Master, please expel the love of dunya from my heart and join me with the divinely chosen Prophet and his household, the choicest of your creatures and the seal of the Prophets, Muhammad, blessings of Allah be on him and on his household. There are two requests in this part of the dua. Firstly, remove the love of dunya from my heart. And secondly, unite me with the Prophet ﷺ and his pure progeny. In fact, as we will see later on in our discussion, there are two sides of the same coin. As long as the love of the world leaves our heart, we are in the company of the Prophet ﷺ and his progeny. That which is stopping us from joining them and being united with them is our love for dunya. You may have read Hadith Qissa, the tradition of the cloak. It is a beautiful narration that details a special gathering in which the Prophet ﷺ went to visit his daughter, Lady Fatima. One by one, Imams Ali, Hassan, and Hussain al-Islam came home and joined the Prophet ﷺ. It is a heavenly gathering so beautiful that even the angel Gabriel requested to join. Almost as if the Prophet ﷺ knew that in years to come, people reading about this beautiful gathering would wish that they too could have joined it. At the end of the narration, he gives glad tidings that whenever a group of people gather to remember this event, they will be showered with God's mercy and love. It is as if they too have joined the original gathering. The narration is almost an invitation for a gathering of all believers till the end of time. Here, Imam Sajjad al-Islam also talks about being united with the Prophet ﷺ and his pure progeny. But before this, he says that there is one main thing that stops us from joining, and that is love for the dunya. In other words, it is not that God or the Prophet ﷺ are barring us from joining them. Rather, in our hearts, there is sometimes more love for dunya than for them, leaving us stuck chasing the dunya instead of being liberated to join the heavenly gathering. Love for the dunya. A very important point that needs to be clarified early on is that Imam Sajjad al-Islam is not asking God to remove the dunya from his life. In other words, to be united with the Prophet ﷺ, we do not need to entirely let go of the world and what it offers. There is nothing wrong with this world. As we said previously, this world and everything in it is a creation of God and a signpost to Him. The two ways of being in this world. The problem begins when we have the wrong attitude towards this world. Imagine it is nighttime and you are out with a friend. Suddenly she sees the full moon. She finds it so beautiful that she becomes excited for you to see it too. She raises her finger and points at the moon to help you know the direction to look in. As she points, you find the way she is bending her finger interestingly. Do you always point like that? You ask her. What might she reply? Focus, don't become fixated on my finger. Instead, look at what it is pointing at. This is akin to our situation in this world. There is nothing wrong with the world or the beautiful things we find within it. It is God's creation. However, all these things have a sole ultimate purpose, which is to help us to find God. If we forget that and fixate on these things instead, it is like looking at the finger instead of what it is pointing at. You may wonder how the things in this world point towards God. We touched upon this to some extent in the early chapters when we were discussing Tawḥīd. Consider this practical example to help us understand a little better. Think of the food we eat daily. We might not realize it has everything to do with our spirituality, but it does. Every nice meal we have ever enjoyed was a finger pointing to God's love. If we eat the meal mindful that through this food God is showing us love and taking care of us, we have managed to follow the finger and find the moon. But if we just eat the food, forgetting God's love, we're fixating on the finger. A lot of people may think that to be spiritual, they need to avoid worldly pleasures or enjoy this world less. What we are learning from Imam Sajjad al-Islam is that there is nothing wrong with owning or enjoying material comforts or possessions. All we need to do is to constantly remember that it is God's love behind them. The reason why this is important because of the fleeting and temporary nature of this material world. You'll eat the food once and it finishes. If your gain was only in the food, the joy experience will only last a few minutes before dissipating. So much effort cooking for only a few minutes of joy. However, if you manage to see God's love behind the food, you will gain something that lasts forever. The food will finish, but the love that you now feel in your heart will always be there. Every meal will make your relationship with God stronger. All these moments coalesce, and gradually you get to a point where your heart has experienced so much of God's love that it finally finds peace. Look how beautifully God explains this in the Quran. What you have runs out, but what is with Allah remains. Quran chapter 16, verse 96. Food, money, and cars are not bad. They are all blessings of God. However, they will all perish one day. Food is only with you for a few moments, a car for a few years, and your money, at most, till your death. If you spend your days solely focusing on and pursuing them, you have chased things which you will have to let go of at some point, things which perish. If instead you realize that your main goal in this world is to find God, you can enjoy your food, car, and money, as well as all the other blessings you have, and at the same time gain a relationship with God that will bring you joy for eternity. The theme park. Let's elaborate using an example. It is the first term of university and most students have not yet made close friends. A society at the university organizes a trip to a theme park, and some of the students sign up. Finally, the day comes and they all go to the theme park. Once they arrive, students spend their time differently. One student is just excited to be there and wants to make the most of it. As soon as he arrives, he goes for the rides he likes. He rides the biggest roller coaster he can find and then goes in search of another, and another. He gets hungry and goes to the all-you-can-eat pizza place to enjoy the slices of vegetarian pizza. Then there's another student. He's also very excited to be there at the theme park, but in addition, he understands that this might be a good chance to make friends. From the start, he is looking for an opportunity to start a conversation with his fellow students. He uses the theme park as a pretext to talk to one of the students. Which ride are you going to first? It seems like they may both want to go on the same ride. They try the ride together and then go for a bite to eat. Both the first student and the second had a lot of fun. They both enjoyed the rides. They both ate. So, what's the difference? Whilst they both had fun that day, by the next morning the theme park will only be a memory. The fun is over and the food digested. The first student gained pleasure, but by the next day it had faded. Nothing wrong with that. How about the second student? The fun he had is fading too. However, he also used the day to make a new friend. Even though the fun of the rides is over, he has now a friend with whom he can make new and even more fulfilling memories. A friend that will remain with him in the future as well. This is how the Quran encourages us to look at our lives. We can either use every moment in dunya as an opportunity to strengthen our friendship with God, or we can forget God and just focus on enjoying the blessings we have right in front of us. In both cases, we're enjoying the blessings. But in the first, even after the blessing is over, the one who gave it to us is still there, and he has so much more to give us. And the worldly life is nothing but a game and diversion, but the home of the hereafter is best for those who are mindful of God. Quran chapter 6, verse 32. Without paying attention to our relationship with God and our resultant growth, life becomes like a theme park. We play and have fun, but soon it will all perish. If, on the other hand, we remember our growth, we can still enjoy the rides, but also not lose track of that which is longer lasting. A rapid lateral flow test for the dunya. There is a rapid test that can show us if our result for the love of dunya is positive or not. Do not worry, we do not need to insert any swabs into our nose or mouth. All you need to do is see how you view the blessings in your life. Do they remind you of God's love for you or not? If they do, that is amazing, but if they do not remind you of God's love, your test result is positive. Do not panic, you do not need to quarantine, and you do not need to get rid of your blessings and let go of what you love. Some people feel that a spiritual person should not have material possessions. That is not what we are inferring here. It is not about what you have, it is about your attitude towards it. This world has a purpose, to help us feel God's love for us. If I am distracted from God as I am enjoying my blessings, it means I have lost sight of the purpose. The moment will end, and I will not have gained the gift which was within it. Sometimes it is the blessing itself that distracts me. The food is so delicious that I forget to think of He who sent it for me. Sometimes the distraction comes from my ego. My lecture goes well, and all my ego makes me think is how amazing I was. The lecture may well have been great, but my ability to deliver it was a gift from God in a way in which He was showing me love. Instead of spending it in self-congratulation, I could have used that opportunity to feel his love for me. One of the titles of the Prophet ﷺ was Al-Amin, the trustworthy one. The usual meaning of trustworthy that comes to mind is to return those things we have borrowed. If someone has entrusted an item to me, I recognize that it is not mine, and I do my best to return it to him as quickly as possible. Of course, this is not an incorrect meaning, and the Prophet ﷺ was a role model in this sense of the word. However, his trustworthiness was not limited to this. He was also trustworthy in his relationship with God. In other words, whenever he found something good in himself, he would consider it to belong to God, and immediately return the praise to him. For example, if he showed kindness to someone, he would not think, I am being kind. He would recognize that this was God's kindness that he had been given to share. If he gave someone wise counsel, he would not think, I am knowledgeable. Instead, he would remind himself and those around him that God was the one who gave this knowledge, using the Prophet ﷺ as a vessel. God is the source of all good. He loves us so much that he shares his goodness with us. This is the true meaning of Alhamdulillah. When a person begins to practice this attitude towards the dunya, they become like the Prophet ﷺ and join him and his progeny in the heavenly assembly of those who are mesmerized by God's love. As we join this assembly, we realize that the peace and pleasure we were chasing in this world was actually to be found elsewhere. All the blessings of this world, as beautiful as they are, get their beauty only from God. We realize that chasing pleasure in this world only gets us stuck in the wrong cycle. On the other hand, looking for God's love in this world and cementing a relationship with him is a guaranteed route to joy and peace. A world devoid of God is the root of all our worries. It may give us the false promise of joy and safety, however, each time we reach a stage, we realize it was an empty promise. The world with God is a beautiful opportunity for growth and love. Let us read Imam Sajjad's phrase one more time, and this time, ask God to help us become like this. O my Master, please expel the love of dunya from my heart, and join me with the divinely chosen Prophet and his household, the choicest of the creatures and the seal of the prophets, Muhammad, blessings of Allah be on him and his household. Chapter Summary. In this section of the dua, Imam Sajjad asked two things from God: to remove the love of dunya from his heart and to be united with the Prophet ﷺ and his pure progeny. These two requests are interconnected, as the love for this world is what separates us from being in the company of the Prophet ﷺ and his progeny. However, it is important to know that Imam Sajjad is not asking God to remove the world from his life, but rather to remove his attachment to it. The world and its blessings are not inherently bad, but if we solely focus on them, we risk losing sight of our ultimate goal, which is to find God and feel his love for us. Therefore, we should enjoy the blessings of this world while also using them as a means to connect with God and his love for us. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Chapter 17, A Hopeful Heart. In this phrase of the dua, Imam is teaching us how to enslave our hearts in those most difficult moments of life. Make firm our hope for you in our hearts. Make not our hearts to deviate after you have guided us aright, and grant us from your mercy. Surely, you are the only one who gives. Previously in Chapter 8, we discussed the importance of having hope in our salvation and not letting our shortcomings limit our spiritual growth. The focus was on trusting that God will forgive us and guide us to higher levels of spirituality. In this chapter, we will explore a different facet of hope. While it is true that hope can sustain us, and when we make a mistake and seek forgiveness, its power extends far beyond that. We will delve into the role of hope in our everyday lives. Going through life with hope. Hope can be a part of every moment of our lives. If we are struggling at work, our hearts can remain hopeful if we remember God is the one who provides. During an illness, our hearts can have hope in God and know that he is there with us. Initially, we may have experienced hope only in important moments of our lives, like the ones mentioned above. Gradually, however, we realize that in every moment or in any task, no matter how big or small, we can have hope. This is what Imam Sajjad is asking from God, a hope that is always present in the heart. Make firm our hope for you in our hearts. Imam Sajjad teaches us that hope in God can become so ingrained in our hearts that we experience everything through it. It may be useful to use an analogy to illustrate this point. Imagine how difficult it would be to walk everywhere barefooted. There might be small stones or sharp surfaces that could hurt our feet, or at the very least, really irritate us. In addition to the texture, the temperature could also really bother us. Think of walking on snow and freezing, or walking on hot sand and burning. How do we avoid all these types of discomfort? We wear shoes. We can then walk on the exact same surfaces and have a very different experience. Walking on the snow would no longer be difficult, it may even be enjoyable. Hope is just like those shoes. Without it, it would be very difficult to walk through life and go through some of the trials and tribulations we face. We may become scared or anxious, but we can wear our hope in our heart as a protective barrier, go through the same situations and find them so different. Hope becomes a cushion that protects us from the harshness of difficulties and reminds us in every moment that our loving God is with us. Hope Factory. You may have experienced instances in your life when you were going through a tough time, but there was something inside of you that gave you hope and made it easier to go through the event. Initially, these hopeful moments could be few and far between. Gradually, as we begin to ask for hope like Imam Sajjad is teaching us to, it becomes a part of our lives. An important point for us to realize is that having hope is not in our hands. You may have found this out for yourself. There are moments in your life where we just cannot feel optimistic or hopeful about the future. No matter what we do, it does not change. This is also why it is often not very useful to tell a pessimistic person that they should have more hope. If they knew how to have hope, they probably would already have tried it. Hope is not in our hands. Even the most optimistic amongst us will go through moments when they lose their hope. That is totally fine. In fact, there is a beautiful lesson to be gleaned from these moments. We often know how hope feels, but it's also useful to think about what it actually is. Is hope an emotion? Is it a feeling? What is hope made of? Knowing this will help us realize why we can't just create hope in ourselves. Hope is a result of a relationship, and we cannot forge it on our own. The ingredients for hope can be found only in a relationship with our loving and powerful God. If we remove God from the equation, then we become one of the billions of creations in this world, who are competing with one another for jobs, love, and many other things. Even if we do not consider those evil-intentioned people who may want to hurt us, there are a million reasons why things could go wrong. In a world like this, it is very difficult to be hopeful. Why would anything go right? But that is a reductive view of the world we live in. This world has not been created by chance. It has a creator, one who loves us and is there for us. Hope is when we start feeling the presence and the love of the Creator in our hearts, and that naturally leads to an assurance that no matter how things seem on the outside, as long as we are with God, we will be fine. Imam Sajjad is teaching us not to put the burden of finding hope on ourselves. You cannot create hope. You must simply take your heart to God and ask Him to fill it with hope. Once God has filled your heart with hope and set it firm, do not forget that it is He who is the source. If you forget that it was God who did it for you, your levels of hope will begin to reduce, and at some point, you will run out. A fickle heart. One of the interesting qualities we have is that when we become used to a quality within us, we tend to forget its source and start to think we can create it ourselves. If we feel strong for a while, we start to think we have mastered strength. If we have a few great insights, we start to think it is down to us. This is a very natural and human thing to do. The only problem is that it sets us up for disappointments. Suddenly, we find ourselves in a situation, and no matter how hard we try, we cannot access the requisite strength, knowledge, or whatever other quality we mistakenly thought was ours. In the next phrase of the Du'a, Imam Sajjad teaches us how to avoid this disappointment. He says that after hope becomes firm in your heart, do not forget how it got there. Do not think that you own that hope. That hope was gifted to you by God out of His love. In the next line, Imam Sajjad says, "Make not our hearts deviate after you have guided us aright." Imam Sajjad knows that the hope he feels in his heart is coming from God, and that without God's love, he would not have been able to remain hopeful. He therefore asks God not to let him lose said hope. This is the third stage. To recap, the first is to feel God's presence and love for us, leading us to being hopeful in certain moments of our lives. Secondly, we ask God to make hope more frequent in our lives. And finally, once we have hope in all moments, we tell God that we know that this is from Him and ask Him to help us not to lose our hope. We know that without God, our hearts are so fickle that hope may slip away from us. One moment we are hopeful, and the next we are not. In this phrase, Imam asked God not to let hope slip away from his heart. Guidance equals hope. Another very powerful element of this section of the dua is Imam Sajjad's reference to the state at which hope is firm in our heart as guidance. Make firm our hope for you in our hearts. Make not our hearts deviate after you have guided us aright. This is such a profound idea. Many of us worship for years and keep asking for guidance without realizing that the guidance we're asking for is to have hope in God. Imam Sajjad asked God not to abandon him once he has come into his life and bestowed a hope into his heart. Imam does not want to live on his own once he has been guided to a life with God. Everything goes back to this point. Everything good comes from God. We can either live with him and allow him to fill our moments with goodness, or live on our own. When we live on our own, all our gaps and shortcomings will be amplified and reflected back onto us. On our own, we lose our temper even with our loved ones. On our own, we get scared. On our own, we do things we're not proud of. On our own, we lie and fall into multitudes of sin. If we choose to proceed with God, he gives us strength. He gives us love. He gives us patience. A life like this is a life full of hope, one in which we know that no matter how difficult it gets, we have hope that with God at our side, we can handle it. God will be enough for those who put their trust in him. Quran chapter 65, verse 3. Imam Sajjad says that this hope is the guidance we have been looking for all along. We can remain hopeful, knowing that instead of relying on our own limited resources, we can live life on God's unlimited resources. The next line of the dua says, "And grant us from your mercy, surely you are the only one who gives." It is as if Imam Sajjad is saying to God, "Give me a gift from the treasures of your mercy. Shower me with your mercy. You are the only one who gives gifts. No one else has anything to give." Imam Sajjad is helping us learn that the best way to live is through reliance on God. There is a beautiful line in the beginning of Imam Hussein's Du'a Arafat that summarizes this whole dua and also narrates the story of the universe. Praise be to the Lord, whose ordinance cannot be repelled by anyone, whose gifts cannot be stopped. The key to hope lies in this phrase. Imam Hussein says that when God wants to give a gift, there is no obstacle that could stop him. This has a lot of practical implications. Let's say you're about to have a difficult conversation with someone and you are very nervous. You wish the clock would run slow so that the moment of confrontation never arrives. Imam Hussein would tell you to ask God for help. At the very moment, you can ask God to shower your heart with courage so that you would be confident during the conversation. You may acknowledge God's power, but feel the problem is you. Maybe you are too nervous or lack confidence. Imam Hussein's words remind us that neither this nor anything else could stop God from giving. No one can withhold the mercy God opens up for people. Quran chapter 35, verse 2. This is the true source of hope in our lives. Think of so many of the excuses we either say to ourselves or have heard from others. I am too weak to do it. I am too old to learn. I have too many sins. I can't be spiritual, and so on. Imam Hussein says that you may well be weak, old, or unable to change, but none of these can stop God from helping you. The best attitude and the only prescription for growth is to realize two things at the same time. Our own shortcomings, and that with God, anything is possible for us. The emptier we feel we are, the more God can pour into us. The person who feels proud and great in front of God is telling God that they do not need his resources. On the other hand, when we feel weak or powerless or that our cup is empty, it is an opportunity to take our cup to God and ask him to fill it. When God fills, there is no end to how much he can give us. In front of God, the emptier you feel, the higher you will get. Chapter summary. In this chapter, we learned that hope is a powerful force that provides a protective cushion during difficult times, reminding us that we are not alone and that a loving Creator is always with us. Through hope, we feel the presence and love of God in our hearts, leading to the assurance that as long as we are with God, we will be fine, no matter how challenging things may seem. It is essential to remember that hope is a gift from God, and we must continually ask for more hope in our lives, and we request God's assistance in preventing us from losing it. Imam Sajjad also taught us that hope is the guidance we have been searching for, enabling us to rely on God's infinite resources instead of our limited ones.